Welcome to a homegrown family podcast where we grow the produce and the kids. Hey everybody, welcome to a homegrown family podcast. I'm your host, Joe Metler, and today we have my brother David here with me joining us on this episode. Hey David. That's your cue.
Hey Joe. I was sometimes you let me jump in, sometimes you just keep going.
Yeah, I know. I thought about it. David is a familiar voice that you guys have all heard on this podcast or in multiple episodes. At this point, he's almost like a co-host. But for those of you guys who are just kind of jumping on in, David is my younger brother that's directly underneath me. And we tend to have a little chit-chat episode about gardening and things almost like every spring. Well, it's springtime here in Minnesota, or very close to it, fingers crossed, knock on wood. You kind of scroll through, the list of different episodes we've done. Every year we have something in the springtime, it seems like, whether it's just talking about what we're growing that year or what our gardening plans are, or if we're trying something new or different. You'll kind of notice in some of the episodes, one called Seeds and Such, we talk specifically about starting plants and where we purchase our seed. We talk about our catalogs, our seed brochures, catalogs that we get every spring. Talk about how David kind of gets into his basement and grows a lot of the plants for the family and stuff like that, get things started. Appreciate him for that. Saves me a little bit of money there, but
yeah, that basement is maxed out right now.
How many plants you got in there total right now?
Probably around like 400.
That's insane.
Yep, yeah, a lot of plants down there.
And the only downside with that is that sometimes I have to wait a week before I get my plants when I really want to plant my garden or something. You got to coordinate meeting at the farm or something like that. So.
Yeah.
Well, today we're going to talk a little bit kind of like what we got going on. We're also going to talk about some companion cropping / companion planting, however you want to look at it. So stay tuned for that. Another previous episode that we did in the past was We're Out Our Garden, where the two of us talked about, what do you want to do when you're looking at a new property and where you want to plant your garden? How do you choose the location? We talked about many different things that you want to look at there. For those of you guys who are trying to jump on board here, I just recently moved to a 5-acre patch of land out in the country finally. And you're probably kind of like, well, how are you talking about all these episodes with different farming things and gardening things and all this stuff when you don't even live in the country? Well, a lot of that's probably from my experience growing up on the farm and helping out in the farm and everything. So I do have some credibility.
And you can do a lot in town. I live in town too.
That's true. Well, not everybody can buy the seed lot across the street and make a garden out of it.
Yeah.
So I just purchased this property, 5 acres, and there's an old garden spot there where you could tell the previous owners had a garden at one point. I don't know if they ever had anything in the last couple of years because it was pretty overgrown and everything and full of gopher mounds and all this stuff. But I'm probably going to grow my garden in the exact same spot. Pros or cons, probably going to be full sun. Looks like there's no natural shade around the area at all. Could be a pro, could be a con, depending on what you're trying to plant, and I'm probably a good 100 feet away from any water source. So you got to look at a long, long hose. But I think it's going to be a really good spot. Hopefully, I haven't tested the soil at all yet, which is one thing I stress when you're talking about starting a garden spot, as you want to test the soil, maybe see kind of where you're at with nutrients and everything. But I'm just planning on getting some compost and stuff and tilling it all in and starting fresh, basically, as if I had nothing there. So it doesn't hurt to start off a little bit strong with some of your nutrients. As long as it's not too far in excess, I guess. I know one of my problems is probably going to be deer and rabbits. I've had multiple rabbits already coming through. Deer, I don't know. It's not like a pathway, but it's I'm kind of living on the edge of a swamp. And so they kind of come around the edge and they get a little sniff of some tender greens. They might come by and take a nibble. So I don't know. We might have to put up a fence, might not. We'll see.
Word to the wise, don't buy the fence that says rabbit fence from Menards. The smaller rabbits can still get through that. So definitely use something like chicken wire, some smaller holes, at least on the bottom couple of feet of the fence.
Speaking from experience.
Yeah, speaking from experience. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And so, and we also got another springtime episode, garden produce planning and prepping. That title speaks for itself. It's just, so we got all these old episodes that are pretty much timeless in content and information that you can go back and listen to that we may not talk about this episode, but there's also, that's kind of one of the things I like about this this podcast, these creating some of these episodes, is that a lot of them are kind of timeless, and you can go back and learn about raising sheep, or you can go back and learn about maple syrup, and it's not really specific to any given year. So it's information that can always be useful. So I encourage you to go back and look at some of the old stuff. And as you're going through back looking at the old stuff and enjoying the information and all the things, go back and leave a review, rate the podcast. It helps kind of populate and pop up on the Google searches and things like that more often. The more, people respond and react to your episodes. If you're interested in supporting the show, go down to the footnotes, in the show notes there, and click support the show. It'll bring you to a website called Buy Me a Coffee. So you can make a little donation there, whether it's $5, $10, or whatnot. I got a newborn, and now I have an hour commute, so I kind of lost my early morning, prep time for these podcasts and editing. So I might definitely need a coffee here. I got to start waking up a little bit earlier, So, anywho's, let's get back into it here. So we're talking about gardening with my brother here today. So now it is currently the mid-April. Who knows when you'll see the podcast? Probably May. We'll see. Hopefully before then, so you can make some decisions on what you want to do. But we looked at an early spring here in Minnesota, I think, and knock on wood again, and hopefully an early start to the garden. I've already been told I probably should have planted my potatoes already. David, how long have you had your potatoes in the ground?
It's been a few weeks. I planted my potatoes on Palm Sunday.
Yeah. So for those who don't know when Palm Sunday is, when about is that?
I think it was like March 29th this year, something like that.
In March. That's ridiculous.
I planted my potatoes in March, yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so I guess to remind people, I'm over in central Minnesota, and if you're looking at the USDA hardiness zones and such, I'm like a 3-4. Technically, I'm with the new zones they've created here this past year, so I'm like a zone 4, but I'm still pretty much a good zone 3, maybe borderline 4. And David's over there in southern Minnesota, and here, 4, almost a 5?
Yeah, solid 4. I mean, borderline 5. Yep.
Okay, so and he gets in the garden usually like a good 2 weeks before me, and of course we had another foot of snow here about a week ago, so it's all melted now, but that delayed me quite a bit. So
yeah. I planted sweet corn today.
Wow, ballsy.
I also planted peas, so the peas are pretty safe. The sweet corn. Yeah, maybe a little borderline on doing that.
Could get nipped. Yeah. I'm still talking with my father-in-law here today in the driveway at his house, and I was like, I still got to find someone to cultivate my garden because I don't have a garden tractor, and I really don't want to break sod with a little 28-inch rototiller or something. But sounds like he knows a guy that does his garden, and he talked to him, and it sounds like he's willing to do mine. My father-in-law doesn't do his till like mid-May, and I'm like, kind of chomping at the bit, like as soon as this sucker's dry, let's go.
Yeah,
because I got potatoes to plant. Quick question about your potatoes, because I can't remember when I worked in Alaska at an organic farm there. When we cut our potatoes, we had reds, blues, all sorts of different stuff, and I'm pretty sure we had a cutting party where we cut had 2-3 eyes per part of the potato that we cut to be planted, but we cut them like a good week before we actually planted them to let the sides dry and everything. Is that necessary?
I think it's a good idea for them to kind of heal over. Otherwise, if you directly plant them in the garden, there's going to be bacteria and things that'll get into those fresh wounds. So yeah, you definitely want to do it ahead of planting just to make sure that it has time to heal over and kind of dry up.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking. But when I was talking with a couple other people, they're like, "Oh, I'll usually come and throw them on the ground." And I'm like, I swear you let them dry off on the side. Yeah, heal their wound up a little bit first. But so those of you who want that tidbit of information, hopefully I'll get this podcast out fast to you, this episode, so that way you can do that. Oh. Yeah, it's ridiculous how much David plants before me. But, I'm not jealous at all.
Hey, I share the sweet corn, so you can't be too jealous.
This is true. Well, while we're talking a little bit about David here, David has a couple of different things going on. He recently obtained that city lot across the street that was empty that he's kind of using for some garden space there. And I guess I'm just curious. You mentioned the other day when we were at the farm how your kids are each going to have their own little spot, either separate garden or plot or whatnot. I know us growing up, you and me had whole entire separate gardens from each other, separate from mom's, that we kind of took charge of. So just want to take some time to share about what you got going on at your place.
Yeah. So as far as those plots of the kids, right now we're looking at doing something about 10 feet wide by, say, 25 feet long for each of the kids. I think some of them might be a little young for that, but they're mostly looking at doing sweet corn, so it's not really that challenging. I'll help them put it in. They just got to do a little weeding once they're up. It's pretty easy to tell what sweet corn is. Matthias, my oldest, he actually is doing cucumbers. That's what he wanted to plant, so he's going to be doing cucumbers and selling those. Heidi, my second oldest, like I said, she's doing sweet corn, but she wanted to leave room to do some flowers. And then I believe Toby's also doing sweet corn, and Greta is not doing anything. So, but she's 2.5. So,
Gonna say.
and we'll
So
see how long this lasts.
yeah, is Matthias only doing cucumbers?
Matthias is only doing cucumbers. Yes.
Okay, interesting. I'm surprised he's going away from the corn. Did you tell him it was more lucrative or what?
So he realized that the sweet corn you only harvest once and it's done, versus the cucumbers he harvests every couple of days and has a bag full to sell. So he can sell cucumbers the entire summer versus his sweet corns once and done.
He's self little entrepreneurs going on here, huh?
Yeah, yeah, he's a mathematician, all right.
A mathematician.
So yeah, that's kind of what we got going on for the garden plots. That empty lot that I bought, we planted 20 fruit trees over there last year, and we put in a patch of asparagus, some blackberries, and then this spring I ordered some currants and gooseberries to put in, and then also some table grapes that I'm going to put on a rotating cross arm trellis to kind of help them with winter hardiness issues.
Yeah, you got lots going on there.
Yeah, I stay busy.
As you mentioned corn, and you also mentioned cucumbers. As I was kind of preparing for this episode, because there's certain things that we do that we could consider companion cropping or companion planting. I'll probably call it cropping because that's what I'm used to, it being more of an egg background. But I guess let's first define companion cropping, right? So companion cropping or planting is where you're planting, various vegetables or crops or whatever that benefit each other, usually in close proximity, whether it's to help fix nitrogen for one to utilize, for the other plant to utilize, or if it's to help attract insects to protect the other plant nearby, that kind of thing. So it's some kind of a mutual beneficial cropping system. But as you mentioned, your plans for the kiddos, one of the companion cropping situations that is supposedly it's called like the Three Sisters, right? It's common companion planting practice where you have these three crops that are kind of intermixed with each other: corn, which you mentioned, and then pole beans and squash, which I think is pretty interesting. But supposedly the indigenous people used to do this type of thing where they kind of each of the crops kind of support each other in different ways, because the corn kind of acts as a trellis for the pole beans, right? Cutting down your labor in a sense as far as having to create fence or things like that. And then the beans are a nitrogen fixing legume plant, which then fixes nitrogen for the corn to utilize. And then the squash is usually like low to the ground, with large leaves, kind of shades out weeds, helps preserve moisture, helps protect, the beans and squash from bigger pests, because like deer and things don't like walking on squash because they're kind of prickly and all that kind of things. So that's probably like your mother lode of, companion cropping situations where you're taking every inch of ground up in the whole thing. So I was just like, gosh, Matthias should do that.
That is the classic companion cropping scenario that I think a lot of people think of. Cucumbers, we're doing that over a cattle panel archway. So they're very easy to pick. I don't want to try finding cucumbers as I'm walking through sweet corn and green beans.
Come on, you're spoiling the kids.
Yeah, I know.
Actually, that's what we're planning on doing too, is a cattle panel doing an arch. Probably cucumbers coming up one side and maybe some pole beans on the other or something. That's what I'm thinking about doing. But then I wonder if the deer around are going to be able to find the cucumbers. If they're kind of smooth and not very pointy, they might nibble on them. I don't know. We'll see. Hoping not to put a fence up, but that means I got to plant more than what I'm going to eat in anticipation of getting looters. Before we get more into companion cropping stuff, is there anything new that you're trying this year, David?
Oh, there's a new potato that I'm going to be trying. can't remember the name off the top of my head. I think it's Sunrise Gold, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
It's a newer version of Yukon Gold. It looked a little darker orange, so I thought I'd give that a try. I'm also doing spearmint, a few different other basils that are different than the previous years, doing oregano. But yeah, otherwise I'm doing pretty standard things that I've been doing the last couple of years. Nothing too crazy new.
Yeah, I've tried growing peppermint and spearmint in Alaska. Man, they did really well. I've heard of people that have plant those, and if they can overwinter well, then they can be really problematic as far as just spreading everywhere.
Yeah, even in my southern location in Minnesota here, my peppermint died last time I planted it.
That's good. Although it is kind of nice to start right away and just have mint plants right off the bat. But
Yeah.
yeah, and actually, that's one thing I'm planning on doing new this year because I don't think deer are going to bother potatoes. Because I think the leaves might actually be considered poisonous potentially. I can't remember because they're part of the nightshade group of plants and things like that are closely related. So I'm hoping that won't be a problem. And then a companion cropping system that I'm thinking about potentially trying to do with that too is doing like a potato plant. Figure out how wide I need to space them out, and then put like 4 onions in between, and then another potato plant, like 4 onions. Because I think the smell of the onions might not be quite so pleasant to the deer. I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm gonna try to alternate between the two, and kind of have that be like the border of my garden, and
Yeah.
in hopes that they don't, you know, walking in and stuff like that. But we'll see. So at this point in the podcast, I think we're going to kind of talk about our experiences with different companion crops that we've kind of tried. And when I'm a little kid, I don't really think about this kind of thing, so I don't really have a lot of recollection of this. But when I lived in Fargo, or the town of Fargo, where I had raised garden beds, I oftentimes mixed in marigolds here and there. I don't know, I probably didn't have that many square feet. I probably had 10 by 30 at most. That's probably generous. But I had 4 or 5 marigold plants intermixed in between to kind of help deter pests. And I heard it's supposed to help repel mosquitoes and white flies and aphids and things like that. And also while attracting pollinators. So that's really the reason I did attract pollinators and everything, because in town they typically spray for mosquitoes and things like that. So I planted some marigolds in there to kind of help attract pollinators and things for like my cucumbers. That's pretty important. Like my peppers and some pollinators in there. And I also like to plant the don't know how to pronounce this flower, but the nasturtium. Did I say that right?
I think so.
Nasturtium flowers as a kind of a filler and a pollinator attractor type of flower. Also, the cool thing about that one is that you can kind of harvest the flower and put it in salads and stuff, and it kind of tastes like a radishy type of flavor. I would say it's not very strong, but you can eat the entire flower and everything as garnish for salads and stuff like that. And that plant in particular too is also kind of more fleshy leaved. It's not like super super thin leaved, and so aphids tend to like that plant. So you can kind of use it as a trap plant also. If you have some other plants nearby, like beans, that can be an issue. Aphids usually like beans. Mysterium plants are planted close by, they might go to the Mysterium plant instead. And once you see that plant's like loaded full of aphids, you can just pull it out and throw it away and hopefully reduce the amount of aphids that you have in your garden.
So another flower that's kind of useful, like what you're talking, is calendula. Calendula has a kind of sticky resin that it exudes that attracts aphids. And so you'll get all these aphids and pests going into your calendula plants, and that'll in turn attract the predatory insects like ladybugs, hoverflies, lacewings. So you'll keep all the attention away from your good plants that you want to eat and keep them over there in your flower bed with your calendula. You can leave the plant there. I mean, if there's aphids, just look around. If there's some predatory insects that are starting to eat on them and stuff, just let them go. They'll clean them up eventually.
Yeah, that's a good point. You don't have to you can kind of leave them there. You won't have to pull them out, right? As long as they're not pestering your other crops and plants that you want.
Yeah, as long as you see some predatory insects around that are going to eat them anyway, you could just forget about them.
Yep. What did you say that flower was again?
Calendula. They're kind of a nice yellow to orange kind of variability across the flowers, but they are pretty nice. But they will spread and take over. I mean, They do produce a lot of seeds and will reseed themselves every year.
Nice. One of the other things that I've kind of done in the past is, I mean, we talked about Dave and I talked about this too. Is like I call it like vertical planting or whatnot. It's kind of like companion planting, kind of similar to that Three Sisters example with the corn, beans, and squash. In the past I've done it where I plant like something that's early season, like radishes or peas, right next to my like broccoli. Within a foot of my broccoli or something like that. So that way radishes are harvested by the time my broccoli is really shading them out or anything. So it's kind of just maximizing your use of space and things like that. And if it was peas, then it provides some nitrogen fixation and stuff like that. But that's another kind of thing that I'm have personal, experience with, I guess.
Yeah, and you can actually think of it as root systems too, right? So you could plant something with a shallow root system next to something with a deeper root system, like carrots and onions per se. They're not going to shade each other out because neither of them has a huge canopy, really.
But the onions don't like to be wet, right? And so then it can help with water drainage with the carrots. So hopefully it finds the edge of the carrot and gets, doesn't help with any ponding or excessive moisture for the onions too.
Right. Yeah. And I was going to say the other benefit for onions and carrots next to each other is actually onions work as a deterrent, as you already said. But specifically, there's like a rust fly that affects carrots. I have no experience with the insect, but maybe I have had issues with it, and so I've started actually planting my onions and carrots next to each other.
Huh. Yeah, I haven't really done that, but I mean, it makes sense. So a couple other examples that I found that I've kind of looked at online here as I was kind of preparing to get some more content for you guys. Basil and tomatoes are supposedly a good combination. Basil is supposed to help kind of improve the flavor, growth of your tomatoes. And plus they're oftentimes used in the same dishes, so you want to grow both anyways, right? Oregano and brassicas, which would be like a cabbage or broccoli and things like that. Oregano supposedly has some insecticidal properties that may deter pests such as cabbage worm. That's kind of one that I'm tempted to try, especially now that I've kind of gotten into dehydrating more, and so I can actually kind of take my oregano and like dehydrate it and use it later on and things like that. So,
as far as deterring pests and brassicas, I also saw that thyme and mint would also do kind of the same thing for maybe not deterring insects as much, but kind of confusing them. Having all these different aromatic scents and things in the garden makes it so maybe you're masking your other plants and making them hard to find.
yeah, I was gonna say the same thing basically with garlic and sage, also. So, and dill or coriander, things like that. Actually, that kind of reminds me of one of the things I found that you should not do is you should not plant carrots next to dill or coriander because they're kind of a carrot family type of. They're both kind of part of the same family, and so they can cross pollinate and maybe cause some issues with your carrot production and things. They might seed out, a little differently or not grow quite as well or something after cross pollinating or something like that, or for seed if you want to keep seeds back or something like that. But
yeah, that's a good point. If you want to keep any of your seed, if you're collecting seed, but if you're not collecting seed, it shouldn't be much of an issue, I wouldn't think.
yeah, I wouldn't think so. It seems like a lot of these situations that I find online is almost always an herb of some sorts paired with your crop because it helps deter pests or helps attract pests to that crop, that herb or that flower rather than your crop. Another example I kind of found online was cilantro and potatoes. Again, it's kind of like, well, the cilantro being the herb kind of helps protect against your aphids and your spider mites. Potato beetles kind of deters those wave cog because it smells different or weird, and the insects probably can't sense the potato potentially. It seems like that's a pretty good trend. It seems like is that it's oftentimes paired with an herb of some sorts or a nitrogen fixer, basically, I guess.
I think another proven example would be tomatoes and French marigolds. French marigolds are actually known to suppress root knot nematodes that impact tomatoes. Tomatoes are really susceptible to that. So that's a proven companion crop combination, I guess.
Yeah, actually, one thing David has some issues over there in his garden. He doesn't have all the hot things in the world here.
Yeah.
He does have some problems with some squash beetles or pumpkin beetles. What are those called exactly?
Squash vine borer.
Yeah, so a beetle. But supposedly those Nigisterium flowers are supposed to deter those. So I want you, David, this year, if you take some Nigisteriums, put them in a circle, put your squash plant in the middle, and let me know how it does. You should try it.
would be an interesting test. They do affect zucchini plants. I could plant some zucchini, an extra one without nasturtium flowers around it, and then one with nasturtium flowers around it, and see what happens. Because I'm a research agronomist, so we got to do a case study, one with, one without.
In that case, you better have replicates.
Yes, replicates. At least 4 replicates. You're right. Yeah.
So those of you who don't know, both David and I work kind of in the egg industry doing small plot research and things. And so he's involved more in like the sugar beet industry, and I'm kind of more of the wheat and odd crops, kind of flax and sunflowers and things like that. But it's fun that we can interact this way. It's both work and for hobby. So we enjoy that. Any other examples that you can kind of think of off the top of your head?
I don't do a lot of purposeful companion cropping. I do really like the idea of just having flowers or herbs that attract beneficial insects, predatory insects, to naturally control pests. I do really like that idea and concept. And also trap cropping. I like trap cropping. I think another example of that would be radishes and cucumbers. So there's the cucumber beetles, right? And they prefer radishes over cucumbers, actually. So if you leave a few radishes unharvested, they'll kind of hang out in those instead of messing with your cucumber plants.
Nice. And those of you who have greenhouses, trap crops work really well. You just plant extra tomatoes in one corner, and hopefully they'll look big and they'll start going over there and eating all those. Or a cotton's a good one, buckwheat plants. You can even plant like soybeans or something like that in the corner of your greenhouse. They'll just go eat those like crazy, especially like the thrips and stuff. If you have problems with that in your greenhouse, that's one thing that you can utilize in greenhouse spaces also. So, yeah. It reminds me though, you said you liked having beneficial insects and attracting insects and stuff. Last summer, you were talking about how you found a bunch of beneficials on one area of your garden, and you grabbed them and you put them over on a different area where you saw aphids.
Yeah, so I had a lot of ladybug larvae that were eating aphids on my apple trees. So I have a little apple tree nursery, like a couple dozen plants in pots, and I had aphids all over the place. Collected these ladybug larvae from other plants where they had already eaten most of the aphids and brought them to my apple trees that had tons of aphids on them, and they cleaned them up within a week or so.
It actually did pretty good, huh? That's nice. I didn't quite hear the end of that story, but
yeah, it worked really well. Yep.
Sweet. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what we got for you here today. We can kind of wrap that up with it seems that planting of companion cropping or companion plants is mostly due to beneficial insect attraction or kind of aiding in pest management. Working on like aromatic herbs, seems to play a large role in as far as those species that can be used. But you can also talk about soil health improvement. Deeper roots, shallower roots can be good. And then I guess beets is one thing I mentioned that didn't mention yet, that there's a lot of magnesium in beet leaves. And so if you let those beet leaves decompose on the surface, then next year's crop will get a little bit more magnesium into their system. And so, taller plants, shorter plants that can shade out and provide shade for others, that might be particularly important for me this year. If I'm having some taller plants that can kind of help shade other plants that are a little bit more, less tolerant to the sun, being in a full sun type of garden for myself. So companion cropping can also help with using space efficiently. So yeah, I think that's kind of what we got for you here today. If you have any questions, leave them, respond with some questions, to the, platform in which you listen. I'll try to respond to those. Otherwise, you can always shoot me an email at homegrownfam@gmail.com, and who knows, pop some questions my way. And if I get too many, I can always send some to David.
Feel free to send them my way. I'm happy to answer questions. I always enjoy that.
If anything else, we might learn a little bit of something, which is always good too, helping each other, iron sharpening iron, right? So, yeah. Anyways, feel free to rate us again at the Homegrown Family Podcast. Rate us, give us some stars, and then also if you want to support the show, click that link below. And then you can also find me on Instagram at a Homegrown Fam. David's kind of been helping me out with that, posting some different things on my Instagram, So David's working on building a chicken coop. That's all him, and a lot of the tree and grafting and stuff like that's his also. Although also I am going to try to make a Frankenstein tree this next year for apples. So that'll be kind of fun. Stay tuned. Thanks for joining today, David.
Always a pleasure.
Yep. See you around, guys.